I was always a very, I don't know if I want to say creative, but I was a very stimulated kid. You know, I watched a lot of TV. Anything I watched, I was constantly rewriting in my head or dreaming about or rushing to watch again. You know, I was big on action cartoons and blockbuster movies and things like that. And when I was about 13, I started writing down plans for my own story, just as a fun exercise, really. I never imagined it would be a career path. But when I started to write things down, when I started to take the thoughts that were in my head and actually just put them on a sheet of paper in my notes with my math homework and my English homework and all that, in 10th grade, I was 15 years old, I got the idea for a book. And I thought to myself, oh wow, I could do this. I could get this job done. And I did. I wrote a book that I think is quite awful, based on what I've learned since then. But I wrote it in about 5 months. I drafted a complete story. And when I drafted a complete story from beginning, middle to end, that was when I decided that I wanted to go to school for literature. And that was when I started coming up with more books. This book in particular was a book I came up with during my undergrad. I worked on the book with a workshop group, and they were made up of classmates in my advanced fiction workshop, and they were otherwise made of friends that I graduated with. We were all passionate writers, and we wanted to, write good work and hold each other to a standard. So we got together, we formed a weekly workshop meet, and they were the people who first looked at what would become my first published book. When it was ready, I was considering looking for an agent and querying to different publishers, but I was fortunate that I had a family connection in a local publishing house. I can't remember who it was, but somebody said, oh, you should share this with your cousin. And I said, all right, I will. And Barker's Rules happens to be a thriller novel that involves a kidnapping and a serial murderer. So sharing something like that with your cousin is a little scary. It's like, all right, I was kind of banking on family, never really knowing this about me, but whatever, here it goes. But she shared it immediately with her publisher, and her publisher absolutely fell in love with the whole story from start to finish. And I don't know, Stephen King once said he didn't know how much of his early success was luck or talent. And I agree with that. I don't know if it was luck that I happened to share with somebody who's really into that sort of thing, or if it was really, that talented of an effort. But they presented me with an opportunity and a contract, and I just kind of rolled with it from there. Some of his stories, and especially his essays, some of the things he's written about writing, have really been life-changing to me. I really like George R.R. Martin. I was a big Game of Thrones guy, but in particular I enjoyed the novels because I was amazed at how he was able, if you go on the Song of Ice and Fire database right now, literally it's like reading real history, because everything that's mentioned has a hyperlink to the complete history behind it. The man literally created an entire fictional world with no stones unturned. And now that I've been doing this for a while, I realize how difficult that is. So I definitely am inspired by him. I also love this fellow named Josiah Bancroft, who wrote this book called Senlin Ascends, originally an independently published book, now a traditionally published series, because he impressed so many people. Just one of the smoothest, most engaging and creative reads I've ever come across on the market. I'm a big Bancroft guy. I became an independently published author, and I republished Barker's Rules with my friend Andrew Bass. Together we formed a company called One True Promotion. You can find us anywhere on social media. And I put the book back out in 2020. That business has been going since about the end of 2019. I decided this in 2016, and admittedly didn't have a whole lot of foresight because it's supposed to take place in 2029. So that's not too long from where we are now, but so hopefully it doesn't come to this. But it's all about a secret society. So I liked the idea of basing it in our world, where really not much is different historically and in terms of current events, but there's a secret society going on that nobody really knows about. They kind of hide in plain sight. So the world around the fictional world is pretty much just us being none the wiser to what all these crazy characters are up to. I wouldn't classify him as sane. He is a serial murderer. He's never diagnosed with anything, but he is a serial murderer who becomes very obsessively attached to the main character, who is a young woman. Mm-hmm. And he's a frequent offender. He's had a lot of victims. He breaks every law because he sees himself as above the law, which is a theme in the series. This secret society is full of people who believe that they're powerful enough that the law doesn't apply to them. So they do things not unlike what the antagonist of this novel does to our protagonist. He was a part of the Meridian. The second book, Living in Fear, actually dealt a lot with his origins and when he was young and when he first met these people, and they kind of encouraged him to do the things that he does and to, settle his feuds with violence and all that. But since then, he has gone rogue, and he's become a person that even that society fears. The book takes 3 different perspectives. There's the victim, whose name is Melanie Greer. There's Barker, who is the offender. And then there's a character named Tom Macklin, who is a police officer who is trying to nail Barker and rescue the girl. All 3 of them narrate the novel, and they do so from opposing perspectives. So to whether or not Barker is a hero, I personally, as the author, don't see him as a hero, because I really can't reconcile the things that he does. But I really think it's a matter of whose perspective you're reading from. The book begins with a traffic stop. Barker is driving, and the police officer, Martin Greer, Melanie's father, pulls him over because he drives 125 in a 35 mile per hour zone. A little back street with nobody around. So he's just, just doing whatever he wants, and a cop sees him. And the thing is, when Martin Greer sees this guy, he's very, very off-put by him, as you would think one would be. So he gives him a little bit of attitude, he kind of advises him to move on and not show his face around here. He just doesn't like the guy. I mean, he has a weird stare to him, he stares into the man's soul. He's rude to him. He acts like the police officer is speaking up to royalty, like he doesn't really know who he's dealing with. He just doesn't like the guy. He comes to this police officer's house for vengeance, just for that traffic stop. It's incredibly petty and just evil, really. And what happens to Melanie is that she comes home from school and just walks into the middle of this situation. And then she ends up getting pulled into a situation that lasts for the entire rest of the novel. She ends up being taken away from the house and just thrown into a very different world, the world that he comes from. Very different than the mundane, peaceful life that she knew, with a whole different set of rules. He has no code. He is a host unto himself. So all of these people are superhumans. They have enhanced strength, they have enhanced speed. They're able to battle law enforcement without sustaining much injury. So they see themselves as above the law. They see themselves as, the rulers of the land. And he's the strongest of them. He is actually like a freak of nature amongst even these people. And something has happened to his head that we don't really know at the beginning of the novel, where he's come very unhinged. He's a host unto himself. He believes that if he wants something, he can just take it. He believes that if anybody argues with him or comes against him, he needs to punish them with exceptional cruelty in order to teach them that he's superior to them. He believes that most people he meets exist for his amusement. He has very perverse desires, he's got kind of, part of that is due, I think, to the testosterone that builds up from his genetic mutation. And yeah, he's just a lawless individual, and he's gone to great lengths to torture people that have messed with him. So people who know about him know that if they come into contact with this guy, well, really, it's just not worth it. They don't want to invite all the heat that brings. He grew up in a town where there were crime families very active, and they're kind of part of his backstory. They harassed him as a child. So he's adopted some of that too. He's very into deading people. He has a good time with that. He's actually a lot gentler with Melanie than he is with most of his victims, because he has a strange connection to her that he doesn't quite understand. And he's actually behaving in a way that's very uncharacteristic of him. He's a little bit unbalanced in this situation, in the sense that, you know, he might be suppressing some emotions he's never dealt with. We might be able to understand what it is that drives him possibly towards some of his own redemption by thinking he can make this person a friend as opposed to another victim. You know, she's very polite, she's very proper, she doesn't do a whole lot of athletics. She's not that women don't, but she is more of an artistic person, and you know, she's most of her problems in life have been pressure to succeed in her classes and figure out what she wants to do and how she's going to set herself up. Now she's in a situation that arguably calls for a bit of violence. But how does she go about that? Does she know where he keeps his weaponry? Does she know how to move undetected? Does she know how to not be impulsive and give away what she's doing quick enough for him to see her coming? She doesn't know any of this stuff because it was never really taught to her. So I think that definitely her gender plays a big part. And, you know, she's a fish out of water. She's basically having her mettle tested. Tom is local law enforcement. He is part of a police organization that turns out to be a little bit on the corrupt side. There's always been the force and there's always been the crime families, and it turns out in the past there's been a little bit of, shall we say, insider trading. But he's new. He's a rookie, they call him, and he's very Dudley Do-Right-ish. And he's not somebody to suffer corruption. So he goes rogue. He's another rogue. He goes rogue and does his own investigation into Barker, mostly because the guy who trained him was hot on the Barker trail before he died, and he wants justice for his superior officer. Well, this is a funny answer because I feel like some people would expect this answer, but I had a nightmare. I fell asleep and I had myself a pretty sick dream. In the dream, it was a pirate ship. I was on a pirate ship and I was working for a captain who was holding a person prisoner. And my character was this kind of hardened criminal. But I didn't agree with what the captain was doing. I didn't see the person who was being held as someone deserving of that. I thought it was kind of a cheap move for this, young woman to be taken out of her home and held for whatever crazy person the captain had. I saw it as kind of distasteful. I woke up from this dream and I remembered it. I don't often remember my dreams, but I woke up from this dream remembering almost the entire plot of it and distinctly remembering the emotions that the characters felt. And I had to write that down. And that was what created the first Meridian characters. The characters from the dream actually feature much later in the series, but the character of Barker came about when I was trying to picture who was like the worst rogue from this society and what's his deal. I created this character, I made this character, the worst of the worst and a very vile person. And I don't really recommend sympathizing with the things that he does. But yes, it was very important for me to find something about the character that I could connect with enough to continue writing him. I would say that the Greer family take inspiration from my own family. The mundane, Pretty solidly founded family that is, of course, disrupted and ruined by this terrible person. You know, I definitely drew from my own family experiences affectionately, because, you know, to me, drawing on some positive experiences that I've known and seeing him come in and disrupt all of that and turn their lives upside down, that added that element of loss and tragedy that the characters have to contend with. You know, it's always good to really, as they say, torture your characters and put them up against things that, you know, you would shudder to think about yourself having to deal with. Barker himself, I'm shy about telling people this, but I would say he's like elements of the worst of me, you know? Like, I've struggled with some of the things he struggled with. I've had periods in my life where I was angry or anxious and I had to deal with some difficult emotions. We all have. But he's a worst case scenario at the end of that. He's somebody who deals with it the wrong way and is advised by all the wrong people and turns to a life of crime and then acts upon all of his worst impulses and just becomes this unrecognizable person to the kid that he was. And to me, what was compelling about that was, you know, taking one or two ideas that I've known in my life and just spinning it to the absolute worst and being like, you know, just imagine if any one of us went in this direction. Like, what are all the breakdowns that happened here? You know, what are all the things that were missing from this guy's life? It's always a challenge to get into a different mind. And Melanie was very difficult because I've never been a 16-year-old girl. I don't know, I really didn't know anything about it. In fact, a lot of my early criticisms before we made some edits were twofold. One was that they couldn't pin down Melanie's exact personality and character traits. Is she sad? Is she nervous? Is she bubbly? Is she shy? Because there were different scenes where she was all of those things. And it was like, you know, a person doesn't just have every character trait, Alec. Come on, like who is this person? Make her consistent. That was one problem. Another problem was she didn't really process a lot of what was happening to her. You know, she observed a lot of the dangers that were coming within inches of her, but she didn't really have intelligent reactions to them. And another criticism I got was, you're underestimating how developed young kids are. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of kids wouldn't know what I need to do in this situation. That was another problem. So it was hard. It was hard to figure out Melanie. She was harder than the killer because, you know, I'd watched some horror movies, I'd gotten into some sick minds. That part was easy, but getting into the mind of a realistic person experiencing all of that as a point of view was very challenging, but surprisingly so. And I do think her gender figures in because I think as a young girl, she was raised a certain way. You know, if you think about, you know, the kind of story this is and the kinds of antagonists these are, you know, I pictured wandering between different trees, looking up and seeing the moon, turning around and seeing one of these sketchy individuals off in the distance and being like, run! So I just pictured a lot of trees. So I said to myself, okay, where's a lot of trees? Montana. So the whole Meridian is based in the state of Montana. That's where the secret society operates. They operate in a few distinct cities, and otherwise they have their own little retreat zones that they go to. So then I thought, okay, Barker's a rogue, so where does he make his home? Probably not too far away. What about climate? You know, this is a pretty dark book. Does it take place in the baking heat of summer, or does it take place in the cold of winter? I'm gonna say it's a bit of a cold place. So where are areas with colder climate at certain times of year? So I thought colder climate, kind of a darker, murky suburban backdrop, close to the Meridian. I was like, yeah, what if it's a city kind of like Seattle? So I made a fictional city, Newheim, and it's meant to be somewhere on the coast of Washington State. And that was kind of that. Then I just started doing research into those areas to try and be as accurate as possible in things that the characters see and notice, the kind of people that are there, the way businesses are run. You know, usually it's an idea or a concept that informs the research. I'm really not a fan of slashers. I was afraid of horror movies as a kid, and I never wanted to watch them. It was actually The Dark Knight that changed my mind a little bit, because they brought kind of a horror character into the superhero blockbuster genre, and I was like, ooh, I kind of like how edgy this is. And then I found Silence of the Lambs. I was very into that. I liked the conversations between Clarice and Hannibal Lecter more so than like a Michael Myers or a Jigsaw kind of, stalker or slasher story. And I don't like scream queens. I don't like creating a character that's meant to look pretty, scream loud, and then be like, mutilated and tortured. So to tie this back to your question, I wanted Melanie to be a sympathetic character. I didn't want her to be a body for him to abuse. I wanted, at every point of the novel, the reader to be rooting for her character to win, to survive, to escape, to get back to the life she knew. And what was compelling was the way he changed her, the way she changed because of what she was enduring and what she was taking on. And the reverse of that was that he starts having weird emotional reactions to her, so she changes him too. So I would say a core component of a good psychological thriller is, why are these characters interacting, and how do they change or enhance each other? How do they change from the beginning to the end of the book? And what lines are crossed here? How violent does it get? How risky do the situations get? What moral stones do we turn that maybe we didn't want to turn, right? What lengths will Melanie go to combat this guy? Will that be a violation of the values she was raised with? And is that moral if you're in a situation where it's going to be that or death? So I think those are core components of a good thriller, is, an examination of the mind, a person's character, and how they change each other. For Barker's Rules, I was a younger person when I wrote it, and I think I was writing to impress my friends and impress my teachers. I wanted to sort of show my stuff as a writer. I wanted to write something gripping, captivating, dangerous, violent even. Since then, I've thought a lot about how different people out in the world might respond to this sort of thing. Like, for example, a lot of people in the world have been through very serious trauma, and the dramatization of trauma doesn't always go over well with people who, to them, it's not a fiction book. So in the current book that I'm writing, which is the third book, it actually tells a story about Melanie years later. This is a big spoiler, unfortunately, but it actually tells a story about Melanie much farther down the road, reflecting on the things that happened to her as a child and kind of asking herself, where do I go from here? And the reason I even came up with that story is because I met some people and I listened to their stories, and I thought to myself, you know what? I feel like Melanie could really just sort of be a fictional character who could be inspiring to people who, are looking to read some content that really gets them. The trilogy is about Barker and Melanie, but there are more books beyond that delve more into the Meridian Society. And there's actually a very Game of Thrones-esque conflict that erupts there, because there are two leading figures that argue about the direction the society should go. So there's a lot of conversation about, the individuals and the community as a whole. Like, what do they exist for? What sort of conduct should they have? And, what ultimately is the meaning of all of this? Yeah, no, I would say that change definitely applies to the bulk of the series. My dream is to write great literature. My dream is to not only write my stories, but to write them as best I possibly can. My goal is for every book to be different from the last, every book to be better than the last, and to fix whatever errors I made. So I really commit myself to learning and growing and improving, and every book I look back at, I'm like, oh, who talks like that? Who writes like that? Oh my God, this kid, I swear. It's an occupational hazard. I'm always thinking about expansion. I would love for somebody to make movies or shows or even animated series, because I told you earlier I was big into cartoons as a kid, you know? I mean, there's so many different art mediums that I just enjoy. I'm a lover of the arts, so, and I also have a kind of a philosophical belief that once you create something, you should get out of its way. Like if people want to adapt it and share it with more audiences, you know, it's my job to just treat it like something that I made and released to the world, and just let it go out and just spread as far as it does, you know. This is what I love to do, you know. I'm a storyteller. It's what gives me that peace inside that I'm doing what I love to do, and just a sense of clarity about the life that I live. But I really hate to be mediocre, so I really commit myself to writing good books, and if there's a problem with the characters, the story, the plot, I want it fixed. I want to know. I want to, sometimes my wife Carrie will tell me that she thinks an edit could be made, but we'll talk about it next week. I'm like, no, I want to fix it tonight, like now. I can't sleep if I know there's a problem I haven't fixed. Act fast. You know, I'm 30 years old, and while I know that 30 is technically still young, I'm doing all of this while I'm trying to get my finances in order, get a job that actually affords me a home, and is able to help me take care of my wife and I. I'm doing all this stuff at the same time because when I was younger, I really just didn't act fast enough or with enough foresight to understand that this was going to be a problem for me 10 years from now. I would say to people that if writing is what you want to do, just figure out a job you can do that allows you to write and that pays well enough. And that can be difficult, you know what I mean? I tried a lot of different jobs. It's hard to get in places. You know, like there are challenges, and I'm not lecturing people on the ease with which they can get a job. But I would say, you know, start thinking about how you can set yourself up so that you have a lot of time left over to write when you're older. You don't have a million things to juggle in addition to juggling all the story ideas, because that's what it ends up being if you wait around too long. And also, I would say that, you know, I waited a long time to write a lot of the books I'm writing now because I wanted to grow in talent. And while I think there's something to that, there's something to being patient and learning what you need to learn and not rushing to publishing. If you get to a point where you're just afraid to act, you need to act. You've gotta get over that line, because that line will become a boulder, and that becomes something you have to climb over. That could take a little while. I never run out of answers, but I'm happy to answer more at the live event, which I hope people will enjoy coming to and hanging out with me. I'm a nice guy. I'm nothing like the character in the book. So, yeah.
Support public libraries. Like, share, and subscribe for more great videos.